All right, we are live. Welcome to the Focus on Training Humpday Hangout. This is the first Wednesday of the month. We're always here talking training at 1 o'clock, first Wednesday of every month. I am one of your hosts, Brad French. I'm a lieutenant in Dayton, Ohio. Joined by my esteemed co-host, Aaron Heller, out of Hamilton Township in New Jersey. And our other typical co-host, Steve Pegram, Chief from Goshen Township Fire Department in Goshen, Ohio, is unfortunately unable to join us. He had an unexpected death of a longtime member of their fire department, so he's certainly in our thoughts today as we go about this. And then we'll Jason Caughey from Wyoming. He's going to be one of our guests today, a technical panel member from the PPA PPV studies. We will get to him in just a moment. Let him give an introduction to himself. As we go throughout the next hour or so, if you have questions, for those of you watching and tuning in on social media, the hashtag FETalk, they'll pick that up. Chief Halton will pick that up, or the folks at Fire Engineering will pick that up, and we'll keep an eye on that and try to address those questions as we can. So hashtag FETalk. We also want to thank our sponsor for today's Focus on Training Humpday Hangout, which is Ventry Solutions. They make positive pressure fans, high CFM, low weight, rugged design that can be used in a bunch of different positions. So they make a neat product. They make a neat product, and they also make some lights as well. So thanks, a tip of the hat to Ventry Solutions for being our sponsor for today's talk on positive pressure attack and positive pressure ventilation, specifically the UL study that was just recently published on that. So I will kick it over to Aaron to say hi real quick, and he can kick it to Bobby.
All right, hello everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Brad. My name's Aaron Heller. I'm a captain in Hamilton, New Jersey, and FDIC instructor for several years. And I'm looking forward to this. I think this is another one of those Humpday Hangouts that is pertinent. It is just at the right time when the studies have come out, and we've got a great sponsor who's willing to put us up here with Ventry Solutions. It's important that we get the word out and that we discuss all these different options. So firefighters, we're going to mix it up. We've got plenty of ideas, and we need to mix it up with it. So I'm looking forward to it today. And again, also my thoughts go out to the Goshen Fire Department on the loss of a longtime member, and Chief Pegram is doing the chiefly duties in that, which is always very welcomed by the families, but very difficult for the department. So on that note, Chief Halton.
Hi, welcome everybody to our Humpday Hangout, Focus on Training. I think this is great. The Instructor Society always does a wonderful job. My thoughts also with Steve. It's always tough when you lose a beloved member, and 40 years is a long time to serve. And I think our hearts and our thoughts are with Steve and the Goshen Fire Department. Hey, also Ventry Solutions. Thank you so much for doing this. It's kind of neat. They've got a neat little story. They were founded in 1972 by a firefighter who's got a former history being a physicist and a physics teacher. And then after he did the math, as he put it on the site, he determined that the pay per hour as a teacher isn't what it looks like. So, but a neat family-owned business, and the family's involved in the business, and it's an American company with an American-made product by firefighters, for firefighters. Kind of a unique fan. If you look at it, they talk about, the fan has legs, so they talk about how it stands, and which is kind of really cool. They also make a really cool lighting product for fireground lighting. Again, all American made by this great family. So Ventry.com. Please go to Ventry.com. Let them know how much you appreciate them supporting the Instructor Society and this hangout. Ventry.com, a firefighter-owned company that made in America, up there in Idaho, cranking out a great product that we're going to talk about here in depth today. So a lot of thanks to them. Also, call for presentations for FDIC is open. Please, please, please don't hesitate. Get your class, your workshop, and your hot proposal in. We are looking for everybody. Remember, everybody at FDIC is new every year. There's no automatic returns. Everybody goes through the process, including me. I have been turned down. Actually, it's me and Bruno. We got turned down together. But please put in your class. Being turned down doesn't mean you're not loved. It just means that we're other people ahead of you, or maybe next year. So if you tried last year, put it back in. Things change. So please call for presentations, fdic.com, and let's keep introducing ourselves.
All right, fantastic. We got a couple of great guests with us today. I mentioned Jason Caughey. We'll start with him, and then also Larry Conley from St. Louis Fire Department just joined us. So, Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what your involvement was in the UL technical panel on PPA, PPV, and then we'll kick it over to Larry, one of them truckies from St. Louis. Jason, I think you're muted.
Jason, I'm not hearing anybody.
There you go. You there?
Okay, there you go. You were muted there for a second. We're good to go. Go for it, Jason.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Jason Caughey, and I'm the fire chief of Laramie County Fire District number 2 up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. We're about an hour and a half north of Denver, Colorado, and we're a combination department with 3 stations and about 90 members. And it's my honor to be here to participate today. And I served as a UL panelist for the PPA test, and along with that, we've been very active in the international fire service and studying and researching what the folks across the pond have been doing. In fact, I'm in Ottawa, Canada today for the IFIW conference the last 2 days, and I'm presenting tomorrow at the Ottawa Fire Conference.
All right, Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
I'm Larry Conley. I'm a captain in St. Louis, Missouri. Been there 24 years. I work at Truck 13. Truck 13 is a quint, and so I'm not a true truckie in the sense of hooking ladders and stuff, but I do know what to do if I had to do that work. I'm on the board of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, and I'm on an executive board, just got elected to that, so I'm very honored to be there. And currently I'm multitasking, so I'm down at Missouri Children's Burn Camp, where I'm the camp director here. So we got a lot of great stuff going on with a great bunch of kids who've been tragically burned sometime in their life, and we're providing a good service for them this week at our camp. And so been traveling a lot with Brad around the country, not with him, but all of us been doing the same work and taught the principles of modern fire attack and having a good time with that. So getting some frequent flyer miles with that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Larry and Jason both for joining us. Let's kind of get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes of what we were going to talk about today. The positive pressure attack, positive pressure ventilation study was recently released by UL. Steve and Robin, both from UL, and certainly Dan and all the folks over there, put a tremendous amount of work into this study, and a lot of great information. The fire service is at a point right now where it's really thirsty for knowledge and thirsty for information, and that's a really positive thing for us to be going through and evolving forward as a fire service. We want more data, we want more numbers, we want scientific backing to a lot of the tactics and things like that that we commonly employ, and see, you know, what works, what doesn't, and if something comes along that maybe goes against something that we always thought was a certain way, we have to be open to that and recognize that, you know. Just going through some of the tactical considerations myself, you know, as far as distance from the fan, back from the door, and the concept of how important the cone is, and creating that cone and verifying it with your hand around the door, not really necessarily being quite so important from some of the studies that they were seeing, and backflow coming out of the top of the doorway from some overpressure, no matter what the positioning of the fan was, and the importance of exhaust sizes and things like that. A lot of important things in there that as a fire service we need to digest, and then at the local level figure out how that boils down to what our operation is. So with that being said, we'll go down along the line and kind of talk about how your department utilizes fans, whether that be in more of a PPA setting or a PPV post-knockdown setting, successes and failures you've had over the years, and how this study and kind of digesting it and implementing it at the local level will have an effect on your operations. Let's start with you, Aaron.
Well, I can tell you, in our department, years ago we brought PPV in right away, actually, when things started to show itself. Probably back in the late 80s, early 90s, we started bringing some PPV in. And through lack of education and other things that we were doing, we were not successful at all. The other thing that we hadn't considered way back then was the construction that we were going into. And we created some fire that we didn't need to create because we just weren't properly trained in the use of the equipment. You know, that's one of the things you get when you get new equipment. You have to understand what it's going to affect and how it's going to affect it, and whether it's fans or nozzles or rescue tools or anything. And we were not trained, and I was a very young fireman at the time, and saw some ugly things that we did. Over time, we adjusted, of course, like any good department would, and we realized that for us, the best use of PPV was post-knockdown. We haven't used it with attack, and we haven't had an issue. But with post-knockdown, it's been fantastic for us. We have a lot of big buildings. We have a lot of commercial buildings. My last shift, we had a little fire in a break room in a hotel. First floor break room, filled the first floor pretty good with smoke, and we had a truck company in, and we used it, and it was just fantastic. We cleared a lot of smoke in a short period of time because now we understand what we're doing with it, and we understand how we are applying it to the structures that we have. You know, and again, I think a lot of it has to do with geographically what type of structures you're dealing with, what type of building construction you have. Are you non-combustible? You know, the way we're going to push a fire or fight a fire in Mercer County, New Jersey, versus the way they do it in Palm Beach County, Florida, you know, the construction's different. We have to take that all into account. You know, I'm sure that's something that we want to discuss. So that's where we are with it. But we utilize PPV quite a bit. Pretty much every job we have, every smoke condition we have, but it's more post-knockdown. We really don't do much PPA at all. And it's not something I'm saying we wouldn't certainly start to investigate again. And my department's going through a big transition. We're getting ready to look at a huge consolidation, so everything's going to get put on the table, our tactics, our equipment, everything. So it's an exciting time to be a fireman.
Chief Halton, what's been your experience over the course of your career, and what are some of the more important tactical considerations that you've taken out of the study put out by UL?
Well, the great question, Brad, and I think it's important that everybody remembers that when we're talking about the use of fans, we're talking about positive pressure attack, which is one technique. There's positive pressure ventilation, which is another tactic. And again, when we talk about ventilation, that's a grand tactic. So now we're talking about applied tactics, and then hopefully applied tactics, and then we'll get down into minor tactics probably by the end of the conversation when we start talking about placement and stuff like that. But early on in my career, it was mostly what we call PPV, which was positive pressure ventilation. And we actually did, oddly enough, back in the 80s, we did do some stuff with what we would term today cold experiments. And if you go to the UL studies at the UL Firefighter Safety Institute site, you'll see that in these studies also, initially, we did cold studies. So in other words, it was just smoke, theatrical smoke and such, to see what the effect of the movement of the smoke would be with the different fan placements and et cetera, which is what we did on our initial training back in the 80s on it. From that, we noticed some behavioral stuff that we attempted to do early on with positive pressure attack, and that's where you actually utilize the fan to help facilitate the entry into the structure and to get to help you get to the seat of the fire to apply water, which is critical. It's a critical component of that whole process. So we were actually very successful. Unlike Aaron, we had a great deal of success with it. Went on to read Chris Garcia and Reinhard Kaufman's later work on positive pressure attack and followed their stuff pretty closely. And we were fairly successful with it. Clearly, we learned early on that not all structures lend themselves to the tactic. And we'll talk more about the tactic as we get through this conversation. We learned early on about controlling the exhaust ports that we made, or the exit port, if you will, for the products of combustion to travel to. We just kind of learned intuitively not to create multiple openings, which was borne out in the study. So as far as our work in Albuquerque with positive pressure attack and positive pressure ventilation, very positive results by and large. Obviously, we encountered a few older structures and a few structures where the application didn't work as well for us, but those we know now, and we understand why. So I think that what was neat, and I think what's neat about this study is that, and if you read much of Nassim Taleb and other people, experience is really, really important, and science is really, really important. So you have to take what you learn from the science and look at it in the real world context, and you have to understand how to gauge and weigh both. And that's the true test of the tactician, is to have knowledge combined with experience, combined with practice, combined with awareness, and you kind of bring all those things together. So I think that the tactic is solid. I think that the program that you'll take on UL's site will show you some very effective use of the tactic and how to understand it better. But my experience was positive.
Fantastic. And I'll tell you, just to throw out a quick plug for ulfirefightersafety.com, make sure that you don't just take a quick conversation like this as your primary means of education on the topic, right? Go to the website, check them out, go through the program. The entire program is fantastic. Specifically, the tactical considerations are really good, and that portion of it is very good. And they also did a fire service summary report. So if you don't don't have the time, or don't want to take the time to read the entire report that really goes down into the nitty-gritty details on the entire study and all of the instrumentation and how it was all set up and so on and so forth, you can at least read the, I think, maybe 60-70 page range fire service summary report. So anyway, certainly don't take bits and pieces of information that we're talking about today as your only training on the topic, right? As far as this study goes, go to the website, go through the modules, read the report, and a lot of great information to have there. And one of the things that popped into my head is, as Chief Halton was talking about the cold flow experiments. The cold flow experiments were something that they also did with the NIST wind-driven studies. They did some cold flow experiments in Toledo prior to going to Chicago and doing a lot of the live fire experiments with that, and the same way with PPA, PPV. Cold flow experiments to gauge airflow are important, but one of the important tactical considerations that I took out of that, and they also encourage in the UL educational model to do your own cold flow experiments and kind of gauge what the level of production of your fans are, and so you know at the local level with the fan that you have what kind of capabilities that it has, but also bearing in mind at the same time that when you're doing cold flow experiments, you're not getting the pressure generated by a working structure fire as you would out in the real world, right? When there is a fire in the building, and not just 3 pallets in a concrete room practicing at the training ground, but a real fire with modern combustibles, the amount of pressure generated by that is significantly more than obviously just a cold flow experiment or a Class A burn building could generate with a training fire load. And so keep in mind that some of the pressure differentials that you'll experience in training and cold flow experiments are not the same as the pressure differentials that you'll experience when there is an actual working fire with modern combustibles. That was just something that I took out of that and I thought was worth mentioning as we move forward. So I'm going to kick it over to Jason Caughey. Talk a little bit about your experience as a panel member at the UL facility and going through that whole process, and some of what you thought were the more important tactical considerations that came out of the study.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, hats off to Steve Kerber and Robin and the whole staff at UL for assembling a committee that was very diverse and very experienced. Individuals from experts in PPA from around the United States, Canada, and overseas, Brussels, and such. So that was important, and to get those experts both for PPA, against PPA, understanding it, not understanding it. You spoke about the cold flow tests. just to determine what fan to use and where to place the fan was an extensive amount of research, because every fan operates a little bit different. And we wanted to select a fan that kind of was in the middle range so that it would be very similar to what any other fire organization in the United States would have on their apparatus already. And so we felt that was critically important. The volume of work that was done to do the test completed, what you get to see in the UL PPA online training program is just a small smattering of the data that's available in the full report. And that full report's a good read for a lot of folks. As far as some of the takeaways, lessons learned. I grew up in a PPA organization, so for 18 years we worked with PPA. It was one of our mainstays. We had positive effects and we had negative effects. We didn't understand why we had negative effects, and we didn't really truly understand why we had positive effects. Some of the questions going into the testing were to say, what are the myths that we associate with PPA? What do we think it's doing inside that structure where we don't have data to support it? Are we getting clean air to the victim, which is one of the true benefits that we thought was going to be important for PPA? Are we really truly pushing the fire out the exhaust hole, and how big does that exhaust hole have to be? Are we getting fresh air to the non-fire compartments for victim survivability? And those were all tests that I thought, or items that I thought were critical for us to determine. Some takeaways that I didn't realize or that I didn't anticipate were the amount of turbulence that we saw inside of the structures, especially in the first 4 to 6 feet at the front door. If we were placing a fan at the front door, we talk about the cone. We've talked about checking it with our hand, like you alluded to, Brad. That turbulence that we were having at that front door was really something that we didn't see in real life or on the drill ground when we practiced it. So that was one part of it. The data to support quick, rapid water. Along with the PPA study, we were also introducing hose streams into that. Can we put it in the flow path from the fan? What happens when we put it in the wrong place? What happens when we vent in the wrong place? All those pieces of the data really compiled together to give us a lot of good information and a lot of stuff to process and chew on. And in all honesty, many of us are still chewing on it. Yesterday, I got the opportunity to discuss PPA with a gentleman from France, and he showed me a picture from 1888. The first positive pressure fan was used in France in 1888, and it was called a smoke push fan, and it was hand operated, and they placed it at the front door to move smoke throughout it. And France used fans until the 1930s. 1938, they did their first experiments, documented scientific experiments on PPV is what they called it. Well, that information, we don't transcend across the water very well. We don't disseminate that stuff to our neighbors. So they had a lot of data. Now in hindsight matches up a lot with the data that UL was able to conduct out of this project. So some really neat lessons there. If you read the critical factors that we want you to address when using PPA, the number one thing that the committee really focused on was don't delay that application of water. The other thing that I took away from it that was different than how I was taught was monitor the throttle control of the fan and monitor that exhaust, because we can't make a big enough exhaust a lot of times, but slowing the fan down, idling it down, will adjust that slightly. We'll get less turbulence at the front door. We'll get less mushrooming on the back side or the exhaust area that's going to come back at us, back pressure as we call it. So those are some of the takeaways that I took from that program.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Jason. And something that you brought up there and was just an interesting little tidbit, and we can kind of throw them in as we go, that I got out of going through the program was that oftentimes people think of your limiting factor as being that exterior front door where the fan is, but in reality sometimes there are other passageways and interior doors of smaller diameters and things like that in reality are your limiting factor to that particular compartment. Larry, I'm going to kick it over to you. What's been your experience with PPA, PPV? How do things go out your way, and what are some of your takeaways from the study?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good, Larry. Go for it.
Okay, good. in St. Louis, we haven't. The PPA is nothing that we've used or mastered. We've always been pretty much PPV here, and so the challenge has always been able to do it strategically, so you don't find fire when you're not supposed to. And this happened a couple of times when people were not practiced on that particular maneuver. I have to say, as far as us doing this principles of modern fire attack, that knowing that how important air is, along with water, managing that air is critical, and that's just something that I'm not saying it's new, but you kind of been taught like this is the way we've always done it kind of deal, or when you ventilate wrong and you're using the air wrong, it can work against you. I think what we're finding out, especially with the new construction that we have, because there's our old brick houses in the St. Louis city are torn down. We have new houses. We've realized more and more now how important it is to manage that air, because things flare up a whole lot quicker than they did before. And we were always kind of cocky, just with the attitude that, we got a brick house, it's an older brick house, we could just crawl in and get it. We pride ourselves on the respiratory attack. And then for a long time, all we did was just kind of ventilate it when we were done. But now we're finding that we have to manage that a lot better, especially when I do construction. And passing that information on to especially our new officers is critical. So part of the reason I work so hard and gain as much knowledge as I can with air management and fire attack and things like that is because things have changed, and with the things that are changing, the more we educate, especially people in our department, in our region, we can, save firefighters' lives and save, the lives of the people we're going to rescue if needed. But right now, just as far as positive pressure attack, that's more of a theory for us in St. Louis. So I'm going to have to rely more on what we've been studying here. Then I can say that we've actually done it. We're more of a positive pressure ventilation company department. The other things I did see firsthand, and a couple of months ago we had a fire, and it was really, it was 3-story brick structure, and we had a lot of void spaces on the 3rd floor. And as we were like digging through the void spaces, somebody started the fan. It was just a miscommunication. It was kind of crazy how the fire that we thought we were hitting, we all of a sudden found real quick. It was like, so I had to make a radio call to the battalion chief, like, cut that off right now, because we were finding it quicker than we were digging for it. So I got to see firsthand that other than an experiment in the laboratory, in the real world, it was really happening. So the combination of experience and what we're teaching, I like to see it coming together, because a lot of the times when you talk to people about different things, and I'll do things on the fire scene that, sometimes I looked at, well, why are you doing that? And so it's good to see the merge between, what in theory and what's working on the street. And hopefully we can get rid of the civil war of, science versus the street. It just seems like this crazy civil war going on. It's kind of sad to see, because I think we're doing more detriment as a profession than we are doing complementing our profession. There shouldn't be a civil war going on. There should be, what can we make sure we bring together, because at the end of the day, I think none of us are doing this for any other reason but to make it safer on the fire ground for everybody involved. So I'm excited about, as I see the merge coming closer, the science in the street, and we can bridge that gap. That's going to make whatever tactic we use, the positive pressure ventilation or the attack, a lot better. But like I said, from an experience standpoint, I'm more of a PPV than a PPA guy.
Well, fantastic, Larry. That's really some great perspective there. I couldn't possibly agree with you anymore about the importance of a combination of experience and knowledge, and as a fire service going through this evolution forward of bridging that gap and plugging in the holes in experience with additional knowledge and adding experience on top of knowledge and so on, and that whole process we're going through as a fire service is very important, and has obviously, as we all know, been a little bit testy at times on both sides of the aisle, although I hate to refer to it that way. But you're right, that's a very, very important thing to go through. And on that topic, just understanding air more, and you really talk to whether it be horizontal ventilation, positive pressure ventilation, PPA, vertical ventilation, water good, air bad, and simplifying it to all the way down to that level. The fire service is just learning so much more about air and flow path and ventilation, and we're undergoing this educational renaissance in the fire service that is a tremendously beneficial thing for everybody. And so that's a great way to put that. We are at the bottom of the hour. It's a little bit after 1:30, so I'll pause just briefly for a couple of housekeeping things. We have been getting some questions coming in. We'll address as many of those as we can towards the end of the hour. But if you've got some more questions, you're welcome to keep sending them in. Hashtag FETalk on social media. And also want to remind you that today's webcast is being brought to you by Ventry Solutions. Chief Halton talked at the beginning of the program about the company and their history. Tremendous sponsor for us, and we thank them for being a part of this. So as we move forward, I think I'll just kind of open up the floor a little bit. Anybody that wants to jump on it, feel free to do so. Let's with the last half hour here, kind of get down into the weeds a little bit more with some of the specific tactical considerations that were brought up, and maybe even more specifically, some that have gone counter to maybe what the fire service had long thought about positive pressure attack and positive pressure ventilation. We touched on a couple, but I'll open up the floor. What are some things that have come out of this that you think are important and that have maybe even differed from what you thought previously?
I got a couple things, Brad, and I'm glad the way that Jason and Larry brought some stuff up, because it really highlights some of the things that I've been thinking of and some of the things that I've seen just through my career in this. And I guess, I briefly read the studies, but mine does go back to the experience on the job of all these years doing it, and now adding the studies to my base of knowledge is huge. It's gonna. I hope my career to be still quite a few years ahead of me, and I hope to be able to, my forte to expand a bit. So I'm glad with both. But one of the things I think that we need to talk about is the types of construction that you're going to face. And I like what Larry brought up about the old brick houses and the voids, and with where I work, we're traditionally northeast community, and parts of our area are very urban and parts of them are very suburban. So we're facing the new lightweight wood construction, the basically disposable houses, the way they're being built when you look at them. But we've also got the old 100 and literally 200-year-old buildings that are filled with void spaces, lots of balloon frame construction, lots of renovations over the last, however many years. So knowing what you're facing before you're going to make a push in with this is really, I think, paramount for us. So if I know that I'm going into one of my local hotels, that's just been constructed over the last few years, versus one of our 200-year-old row homes that's been renovated a dozen times, I think that does make me take into consideration how I'm utilizing the air movement. So that's one of the points. The other point is, and the way Jason brought it up was really clear, knowing the width of the some of the interior doors and where we're going to be sending this, our exit points, and vice versa. That's very important. And in a study, when we're doing this in a lab, that's very easy to tell. But when we pull up at 3 in the morning in a neighborhood that we may not be real familiar with, is it guesswork or do we know? So maybe the guys who've been more involved in the study can answer that, because that's where we're at. So those are two things that really struck out when Jason and Larry both spoke, and I think they really add to the topic greatly.
I'd like to add on the do we know or not know. First off, applying the science along with our street knowledge is critical, and I agree with all of you, and we have to be open-minded to that. One of the fears is that we don't know what we don't know. And so we try to maybe defend our experiences without actually looking at the science. And for all of us to be true professionals, we have to hone our skills and continue to be tradesmen and learn and study. The question about do we know when we arrive on scene, there's two pieces of that in my mind that have really changed. And to go to Larry's neck of the woods where he's got older houses that have been remodeled, those houses in many cases are the same houses that they were in the 50s, but the fuel load inside them has changed considerably. And so the tactics that we tried long ago that were successful have now been affected by what the people have inside their houses. And we have to take that into consideration. As far as the doors and interior compartmentalization, open floor plans and some of the remodeling, it's critical that the one piece that I learned from this study, you got to put somebody on throttle, that controlling the throttle of the fan. If you don't have somebody monitoring the throttle of the fan, monitoring the exhaust, you're setting yourself up for potential high-risk environment. We were always taught, fan all the way up, all the way throttled, check the cone, duck in, dive in, and go after it, which we were successful many times. But with that study, with the new fuel loads, the new heat release, all those pieces, it might be beneficial to throttle down because we're getting too much turbulence, we're getting too much friction loss, we're not getting the flow path development that we wanted to because of a narrow hallway or an open floor plan. The other big piece of that is the air doesn't move smoothly through our structure. It moves in tunnels or wormholes. So it's not a mass of air going through that structure and hitting the exit point. It's taking the path of least resistance. And that can also be controlled again by the throttle or the person controlling that fan. So those are just some of the pieces that I think are important for us to recognize.
Excellent. Chief Halton, what are some of your thoughts? You're still muted, Chief.
That would be Shannon. Shannon, you'll have to unmute me.
Okay.
Am I unmuted, Shannon? Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes, sir. You're good.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. We love you. But I'm sorry. Anyway, listen. The important takeaway, what Jason was just talking about, one of the things that one of the takeaways from the study, which is important, is the fact that you need to continually need to be monitoring the fire conditions, the interior conditions of the event that you're at. In other words, one of the things that we found, which was kind of counterintuitive, we always thought it was the size of the inlet that was the most determining factor, and we were worried about, Jason said checking the cone and all that, making sure we had a complete seal. You all remember that from your training. We found that that was not as really as significant as we thought it was, but what we did find was that the ratio between, if you're using the front door and the exhaust, that was important to control. And Jason talked a little bit about, seeing the smoke coming back on you. Well, that meant that your exit vent was not sufficient. So that's a really important factor. In other words, the PPA concept is not something that you can just turn on and walk away from. Much like flowing water or any other tactic, it needs to be continuously evaluated, really from multiple standpoints, not just from the door, but from the exhaust port and from the interior conditions. So that was really a kind of a neat takeaway. And then one of the other neat takeaways, I think, from all the studies that we found, is that if someone's in a bedroom or another part of the home, talking about residences now, that has the door closed, the tenability inside those isolated rooms away from the fire tends to be very high. It tends to be survivable, which is a critical takeaway that we saw in the PPV, PPA studies as well, that having that door closed made a huge difference. And so when we talk about pressurizing a structure, which is what we're talking about doing here, creating a higher pressure, remember, pressures always want to go from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So that's what you're doing here, and it's important to monitor it. And it's also important to remember that closed door will really leave that tenable environment still tenable. We didn't see dramatic change in that from the horizontal fire ventilation studies and the vertical ventilation studies that we did. That was a pretty consistent takeaway. So I think that what was neat for me, and it's neat, it's brought out very well in both the 1 hour and the 2 hour version of the PPA PPV study, is the importance of the ratio between where you're placing your fan and your exhaust, the size of the exhaust. The other interesting takeaway, and I think that, you know, I love science. Science is a self-correcting industry. So to quote my dad, never throw out your skinny ties. Think about CPR. In the medical industry is one of the most highly scrutinized, studied industries in the world. It used to be all airway. Now it's all compressions. Give us 10 years, we'll go back to airway. I'm just being a wise guy. So you can see where we learn more, we learn more, we learn more, we learn more. It'll be interesting, I think, going forward to conduct more PPA, PPV studies on the open floor plan concept. And we talk a lot about compartmentalization, and we know that PPA works really well in compartmentalized structures. And we're struggling with the open floor plans as to how well that works, just because your ceiling volume and you know, the amount of air and space, just the amount of space in some of these larger open floor plans is somewhat daunting. And so that's kind of an interesting part of the study, and I think it leaves the door open for more study, for more maybe product development, for maybe more research into it, as well as to find out what's happening in the field with people's experience, and which is really, really valid and really, really important. It's equal, guys, and in many cases, you know, there's an interesting fact that most of the advances in technology and science today, and most of the tools that we have, didn't come out of laboratories or universities or think tanks. They came out of tinkerers, practitioners. So you can't devalue that in any way. But they were enhanced in the laboratory, and they were enhanced by studies, and they were improved, and they were developed. So there's always going to be an inexorable tension, and there's always going to be a sharing, which is good, which is really, really good. And the other takeaway that you have to always remember when we're talking about these things is that we work on what they call a critical natural boundary. We work in very dynamic conditions, very dynamic environment. The one thing we haven't talked about yet today, and I'd like to have Jason chime in a little bit, and Larry, because Larry works in a place where this is really predominant, is the void space issue. In other words, once you're done with your positive pressure attack, or you believe that or you use PPV to ventilate a structure post-attack or whenever, you have to really take pains to investigate potential void spaces, whether they be knee walls or walls in general, but cock loss, attics. You have to take great diligence in inspecting those potential void spaces, because remember, you are pressurizing things, and there could be openings. So one of the things in the studies was you always look at those areas and those spaces for possible extension, and make sure that they are clear before you pick it up. But I'd like to hear what the other guys thought about those issues.
Chief, you know, we did test two things. We tested simulated balloon frame construction on the single story, and we also put outlets and light switches in. We did get some smoke into those concealed spaces, but we didn't get charring or burn, which to me, I've been in balloon frame construction where I've applied PPA on a concealed fire, and it's the fastest way to identify where the fire is at, like Larry was saying. And so those results really, they didn't match up with what we were seeing in the streets exactly. So I think that's one area that we continue to research and test more of to find out if that's going to be an impact.
And I think some of those things, when we talk about our experience level, is that the fire may have existed in that void prior to. In other words, you know, it's always tough for us to ascertain whether the fire is isolated to just contents or if it actually has articulated with the structure from our initial size ups oftentimes. So I think that may cloud the issue in some ways.
Yeah, Chief, I agree with you. I think as far as the American Fire Service, it's 18 years for me, so I'm still pretty young in it. We really focus on the fire, and if we look at the fire triangle, we focus on BTUs, we focus on heat, but we've never really studied the air portion of it and implemented tactical decisions that impact the air, whether it's a smoke curtain, whether it's PPA, whether it's closing the door. All of those factors are hugely important as far as the growth and development of that fire. And because we've never introduced it in our recruit academies, we haven't introduced it throughout training manuals, we've missed that piece of the puzzle. And it's probably the simplest thing to work with because it can be easily isolated and easily controlled. And so resurgence in air science, as far as fire science goes, is critical for us to understanding fire behavior.
It's funny you bring that up. A little quick anecdote just for your amusement. If you go back in fire research, and it's funny. Remember, fire engineering's been keeping records of the fire service now since 1877, or 140 years. People talk about being old at 30 and 40, but 140 years. The textile industry used to keep these gigantic warehouses where they had cotton. Cotton was, stored across the United States, but in particular in the Southwest. And they used to have fires routinely. And the fire service would go and we'd open it up. So you had a vent-limited fire that we would come and open up and we would burn those places to the ground with panache. And the textile industry used to plead with us to just leave it alone, basically, to kind of keep the door closed because there was no life safety hazard, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a constant, back and forth. But now we're getting a greater understanding of the whole vent-limited idea, which is important to understand. Unfortunately, the minute we take that door, we're not dealing with vent-limited anymore. And if we're going to use PPA, clearly we're not dealing with vent-limited anymore. So really great points and really fun stuff to talk about and think about. And when you get to the fire ground, the variables that you're weighing and measuring and just when you think about the capabilities and the performance level of the American Fire Service, what an impressive group of people. I mean, just the diligence and professionalism of the American Fire Service is, I think, second to none.
That's a great conversation, and you talking about going back to the 1800s on some history there reminds me of one of my absolute most favorite quotes, and I'm not going to do it justice. I'll screw it up a little bit, I'm sure. But James Braidwood from London Fire Brigade in the 1860s talks about the air should be excluded as much as possible while the water is being brought, as the fire burns in proportion to the air in which it receives, right? And I joke a lot, and Larry and I both teach in the ISFSI Principles of Modern Fire Attack program. I joke in that class sometimes as we're watching some, I guess I would describe it as maybe less than favorable video about, with some over ventilation, if you will, or some misplaced ventilation, to where essentially, one guy with a pike pole can burn down a house pretty effectively if he isn't doing the right things at the right times. And sometimes I feel over the years maybe we've lost that philosophy a little bit and gotten a little bit sloppy with that ventilation. And these studies are so incredibly important to help bridge that gap, and I think to maybe refocus in the fire service on the concept of air, just as Jason brought up a second ago, air science. And I'm not, heard it phrased quite that way before, but, fire science and air science and understanding how all those pieces fit together. We certainly talk a lot about water, and it doesn't take but one scroll through social media on any given day to find a whole lot of discussion about water, but certainly discussion about air is absolutely just as important. But yeah, that just kind of brought up that old quote in my head. I love that quote, and I love that it's from the 1860s. And I just think sometimes the train fell off the tracks in some circumstances as far as ventilation goes.
Yeah, that was James Braidwood was with the London Fire Establishment, later the London Fire Brigade, and he wrote it in the journal, and it was 1866. And he also talked at great length about on the event of a fire, it would often been noticed that a fire would articulate from the first floor to the third floor, leaving the second floor relatively untouched, and this was due to a door or a window having been left open, allowing for air tracks to help carry the fire to these subsequent locations. And so he was describing what we now call flow paths, or interchangeably with our European counterparts, they call air tracks. So, you know, it's a science, it's an element of what we've been doing for, you know, obviously 150 years, and it's good that we're still talking about it, and now we understand even more, and in 100 years we'll understand even more, and we'll still be talking about it.
So we're getting a little short on time. Before we go, I'd at least like to address one of the questions that's come in on FE Talk. So I'll throw this up, and anybody that wants to, we have a good variety of panelists here from different size fire departments. So I'll kind of throw it up, and maybe everybody can give their own perspective. Does the use of PPA or PPV depend on building type and your staffing, the staffing requirements of your department? So how does if you're going to deploy a fan, who's doing it? The driver of the ladder truck, somebody from the engine, you know, a body that you can find from somewhere. If you have staffing challenges, can you still pull off PPA, PPV? So how does PPA and PPV relate to staffing? Anybody that wants to jump on it, have at it.
Well, and I can tell you, I had those same notes before the questions popped up. We see some seriously shorthanded crews throughout the country. Where I work, we're pretty good. We're 4 and 4, you know, 4 on the engine, 4 on a truck. But you know, I know the town where I grew up in, they're running 5 total for everything during the day. So that's a truck, that's a tender, and that's an engine, and they're seeing 5 people. So yeah, that's a good question. We're saying that we need to leave somebody at the door with that fan to monitor that throttle. Makes total sense. If I'm pulling up short-staffed with 4, 5, 6, 7 guys, I'm not so sure that the average fire chief is going to commit one person to say you are at that fan and you are throttle control. You know, I just don't see it as a reality, at least not in the Northeast. It may work in, you know, other locales, but I don't necessarily see it. So I thought that was certainly interesting. And one of the other things that they brought up about was you're retraining our people on this, and how much and how often we do that. And for us, to be honest, we've known about flow paths for a very long time. I mean, when I went through the fire academy in the early 80s, I remember being taught BES. There was no I, but I always knew that I was supposed to get in and close the door. So I didn't need to reinvent myself with the I. When they came up with I thought, hey, I've been doing that for a long time. But so, you know, it's cyclical. It's very cyclical. Here we're reading about James Braywood, and man, if what he didn't tell us back in the 1860s, actually prior to the 1860s, isn't right here today. So, but I think throwing it to Jason, you know, about the staffing issue, because I'm sure up in the Northwest, staffing's an issue there just as much, right?
Yeah, you know, I think you're exactly right. The staffing is a huge concern, and from this test and this result, which is only a very small piece of it, we actually are looking at a throttle person to control the throttle, and then also a person to look at the vent and monitor what's happening on the vent side. And so I think those are all considerations on any tactical decision. You have to look at your staffing model, and so I agree with you 100%.
All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. So I think what we'd like to do, I'd like to hear from Larry again as well. Maybe we'll go down the line and just do some parting words, final thoughts on positive pressure, TAC positive pressure ventilation, whether your department is going to take a closer look at it and implement this kind of thing, or implement any changes as it relates to the study, and kind of some final thoughts on ventilation.
I think from the St. Louis standpoint, our chief and the people who are in charge are pretty progressive, and we're kind of in the flow path, so to speak, of being progressive and knowing we have to make changes, and also being used to what we've been able to, for lack of a better term, get away with. But we're very good at what we do, and the problem is that things are evolving, and we have to make sure we keep up to get ahead of that, because you don't want a tragedy to dictate, you know, your tactics. So I think with the leadership that we have in place, we're definitely going to be looking at things like this better and making better changes. Because around the country, and when we go around and teach, one of the things I always ask is, well, the how is always most people are very good at, but they don't know why. And I can answer that question over again. Well, why do you do it this way? That's the way I was taught. Well, why do you do it this way? Well, that's what, I've been shown. Well, why you do it this way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. None of those answer my question, the why. So when you talk about air is just as important as water, it is. And should we be considering that just as much as we consider water applications? Yes, we should. So, but firefighting is very dynamic, very strategic, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. But I like what you said before. As much as in some cases that we may have a nozzle man who's skilled at the nozzle, we got to have a throttle man just as skilled, because these are all factors that are part of firefighting. And for us to be just kind of one-dimensional in thinking that this is one-size-fits-all, I think is going to hurt us in the end if we're not careful. So I'm proud to be part of a fire department that I know that will move ahead on stuff like this, and I hope the other fire departments do the same as we continue to have forums like this and spread the word. Because just like I tell my guys, actually one of the guys to work on my shift, his daddy was a firefighter and had him assigned to my shift when he graduated from the academy. So I always tease him and say, this ain't your daddy's fire department, and it's for real. It's not. But I do like reading history, and Bobby, that's pretty cool that the fire engineering keeps record for so long, because it lets us know that there's nothing new under the sun. And so for everybody who thinks that we're trying to introduce something new, it's nothing new. All we're doing is putting a spotlight on things that we should never have taken a spotlight off of.
Excellent. Thanks for being with us, Larry. Jason, some quick final thoughts.
Wow, where to begin? Well, first off, thanks, Brad, for the opportunity, and Chief Halton for the opportunity to participate. There's a lot of lessons to learn out of the UL studies, and all of them are valuable. It's disheartening when you travel the country and you visit firefighters and fire stations, and they haven't looked at that information, or they're unaware of it. So I really challenge our profession to really get out there, read, research, study it, and then try to find the pieces that fit your organization. And not everything works the same. Staffing, travel time, lack of water supply, all those components all fit together to make our tactical decisions. And so what works maybe in New York City might not work in Cheyenne, Wyoming, because I'm pretty limited as far as our staffing goes, and long distances in between. But there's pieces of their system that do work, and it's important for us to be smart, to research it, and to tie those pieces together with our experiences and the data to support it, and then make the best tactical decisions we can using the data that we have at the time. And so I think from the PPA study, the biggest takeaways: don't delay water, rapid ventilation after extinguishment, which has always been the concern. We've always said it needs to be coordinated. We really support the use of PPA in the form of PPV once we've extinguished the fire. Those are the takeaways that I learned from it.
All right, thanks for being with us, Jason. Aaron, anything to send us out?
No, just once again, to reiterate what we've been saying. I think that there has to be that meshing of the science and the street experience, and you have to apply it to your region and your department, not blindly. Research it. Do your own research in your region, because the buildings that I'm going to fight fires in Hamilton, New Jersey, are not the same as Albuquerque, New Mexico all the time. So what works in one place, we can take pieces and let's build it what works for us, and don't forget where we came from, and that's exactly it. It's very cyclical. It just keeps going around in circles, and we keep coming back to things that we know work. We just kind of twerk them a little bit, tweak them a little bit, twerk them, whatever the hell you want to call it. We want to make sure that we get these things right, because in the end, it's the people who are stuck in those buildings and the firefighters we're sending into those buildings that make the difference. So that's what I really believe in, and I'm glad to be a part of these conversations with guys who are getting educated and who believe in what we're doing. That's truly the key. that we're sharing what we know, and that this is what develops across the country. And we've got the best forum that fire engineering provides us, FDIC provides us, and we're blessed. We're blessed to sit here with the five of us sitting here talking.
I absolutely agree, and Chief Halton, our friend and mentor, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity first Wednesday of every month to do this focus on training. So thank you, and Chief Halton, close us out.
Well, one real quick point of privilege, if you don't mind, I wanted to say thank you to the hundreds of firefighters who participated in helping our good friend Jason Wheatley. Jason is a huge fire buff. He's the Hoosier fire buff. He's struggling with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Jason's confined to his bed, and his bed was 20 years old. And for those of us that have been in the field for a long time, we know that folks like our good friend Jason need to have the best possible environment so that they can survive and not get bed sores and all of the subsequent issues from that. So the fire service stepped up and helped our good friend Jason Wheatley, and you know, we do the fill the boot thing and all that good stuff, and we sometimes forget that the folks that we're helping are folks like this incredible young man who's got one of the most incredible outlooks on life. He's one of the most intelligent, articulate, beautiful human beings you could ever possibly hope to meet, and he's an inspiration to all of us. So to all of you who participated in the GoFundMe site, from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of Jason, we'd like to say thank you. And if you don't follow him, please follow on Twitter. He's the Hoosier Fire Buff and just a neat guy. Thank you to our great friends from Ventry. What a wonderful company. Please go to Ventry.com. That's Ventry.com. American-made company, incredible products, PPV, PPA fans, incredible lighting products, American-made, American-owned by a firefighter. They know what our issues are. They know how to do it. They use their products. They work with their products. Neat group of people. We can't thank them enough for sponsoring this. Everybody at UL, NIST, everybody involved in the research, thank you. All of you out there who are applying it and learning from it and morphing it and twisting it and making it fit into your circumstances, keep going, man. You just keep going and you know, keep the conversation positive. Remember, nobody has to be wrong for you to be right, and it doesn't make you wrong if they're right. It's just, as my good friend Aaron and Jason just said, context is everything, and where you do your work. Hey, hope everybody's doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please get your stuff into FDIC. We can't tell you how grateful we are for your continued support and contributions. And please, always be careful out there.